Welcome to the Becoming Superhuman podcast, where we interview extraordinary people to bring you the skills and strategies to overcome the impossible. And now, here's your host, Jonathan Levi.
This episode is brought to you guys by NeuroGum, an all-new nootropic gum that enhances focus and boosts your metabolism and attention all naturally. Back their Indiegogo campaign today at neurogum.com. Greetings, super friends. This week, I'm really excited to bring you guys a very special two-part episode. In mid-July, I had the great pleasure of hosting memory expert Dr. Anthony Metivier here in Tel Aviv while we worked on our course on personal branding. While Dr. Metivier was here, we took the opportunity to record a live Q&A on the live video platform Meerkat, where we took hundreds of questions from people all over the world, from his memory students to my accelerated learning students and beyond. We also managed to polish off 2 bottles of wine in 2 hours, scarfed down some sushi, had tons of interruptions, and just generally made a great effort to embarrass ourselves. Nonetheless, this interview is way more raw and I think way more entertaining than you're probably used to from this show. And to be honest, I kind of like it. In it, we're going to cover a ton of amazing questions from our listeners and followers. And they range from everything from memory techniques and super learning and speed reading to more serious topics like depression and anxiety. We even get into health, biohacking, the meaning of life, what it takes to be happy. I hope you guys are going to excuse the very raw and unpolished, drunken format of this episode because it has so much value to offer. If you guys enjoy it, please send a tweet on Twitter at GoSuperhuman or find me on Meerkat and subscribe to more live broadcasts like this one. Anyways, without further ado, let me present to you my live 2-hour, 2-part Q&A with Dr. Anthony Metivier. Welcome, everybody. I'm here with Dr. Anthony Metivier. We have opened a lovely bottle of wine from the Golan Heights.
It's really lovely.
70, 80 people live on Meerkat, 5 people live on Periscope. The Twitter machine is blowing up, and we are ready to answer your questions.
And there's sushi on the way?
There is sushi on the way.
We'll
Good
put
point.
some in an envelope for you.
Oh, we will put some in an envelope.
And
we apologize for the interruption.
FedEx.
And the inebriation. Let me tilt this.
He's inebriated.
I am not a big drinker, so when I do drink, magic happens.
I am not a big person, but
4 on Periscope, 6 on Periscope,
Oh.
92 people on Meerkat.
Okay, so what's the whole thing that we're doing here for all these people who have joined us?
We, in what capacity? Hopefully we're doing amazing things for
Well,
them.
amazing things, but where do you want to start? What do you want?
I figure people will send in their questions.
Okay.
Good evening from India,
Hey, India.
and also good evening in Tel Aviv.
Oh.
Why is there something happening on our screen? What is happening?
Oh, well, I don't know, but
I don't know. Mobbing. Okay.
getting lots of little comments here.
Yeah, indeed. So the principle behind this is, I just realized this is going to be a very interesting podcast if it becomes one. The principle here is you guys ask questions. You have one of the world's foremost experts in memory palaces and memory. I'm already unable to speak. And a guy, myself, who knows a little bit about learning and published a book about learning and speed reading. So
He actually knows
is
a
it good
lot
for the
about learning.
brain,
I've been
drinking?
watching him learn for the last couple of days here. And it's been actually pretty extraordinary, the rate at which he absorbs things. And I have to say, the rate at which he teaches things that I have discovered as well. So I need to actually learn more about the absorption because, quite frankly, we are involved in some pretty high-level production of a new course. And there are a lot of components that he is a master of automating and making happen with streamlined technological facility that is so beyond me. Like, I do a lot of stuff in my head, but he has so many buttons that's configured on his computer that he doesn't use a mouse. He doesn't use the trackpad at all.
Well, I'm flattered, sir.
It's just like this. Now that, to me, is like Glenn Gould on a piano. He's just sort of, if you ever see Glenn Gould on video on piano, like some musicians do, he hums along with the music as he's playing it. He knows it that well, and he's guiding his performance. And this is what Jonathan is doing.
Well, thank you.
No mouse, just keys.
I've been annoying him for the last 3 days with my OCD tendencies, and yet he still has nice things to say about myself and my work. So I am very honored. What
I'd like to see, though, is you do that, learn that, use some sort of memory technique in Dvorak.
In Dvorak?
Yeah.
Dvorak.
Dvorak.
Let's go out to the peanut gallery. So I tried to learn Dvorak, and the problem was the learning curve. Dvorak, for those of you guys who don't know, the original keyboard on a computer is actually designed to slow you down. So it's designed for typewriters so that you cannot type so fast that you'll jam the typewriter. And Dvorak is designed then to fix that, to put the most used keys in the middle. And a lot of people use it, and your Mac already has it. You can switch your keyboard. It's like very easy. Your iPhone, you can get a Dvorak keyboard. I found that the learning curve would be about a week to 2 weeks for me to get over it, in the sense that when I learned the Russian keyboard, when I learned the Hebrew keyboard, when I learned the Spanish keyboard, you're looking at about 2 weeks before you're comfortable. And thank you for your kind words, Mark Hayward. English essentially is such a mission critical language for me that those 2 weeks are just not worth it to switch to Dvorak. So I ended up finding myself going, screw it, I'm just going to write this one email is going to be in QWERTY keyboard, and didn't happen. Although the intention is not to talk about Dvorak keyboards. So hopefully people will chime in either on Periscope or on, 140 people will chime in and will ask questions about memory, learning, learning memory.
Whatever. If you need some personal advice, this is not exactly the psychic hotline. No, I'm kidding. We want to talk to you about the
wear deodorant. Wear sunscreen. Wear sunscreen.
Is he commenting on my laundry issues? Okay.
Does alcohol diminish your ability to learn, retain, or recall long and short term?
Great question.
Yes.
Because here we are, swilling wine.
Great question. Short answer.
Well, here's the thing. It impairs your short-term memory or your working memory to a great degree, but not necessarily in that particular moment. And so you may have had this experience arguing with a drunk who will be absolutely certain that everything that you said 5 minutes ago was what you said and can repeat it with great clarity. And they'll even go and say, get the damn recording machine, and they'll still have a great retention of memory. Yeah. But your working memory is impaired the next day. Right.
But I remembered to refill the glasses. So clearly my memory's working.
He doesn't even wait till they get empty. But there's a good, on my podcast at magneticmemorymethod.com, Luca from polyglotdream.com, he was telling me about how that, he has to, or the time he was working as a translator with the government and all these kinds of things where you have to translate live. And he said that it's just simply not possible with a hangover because of the effects of alcohol on your working memory. So if you hear a sentence in one language and you need to be translating it while you're hearing the next sentence and remember the next sentence while you're translating it, you just can't do it because of the effects of alcohol in your memory.
I'll also comment that alcohol kills brain cells. This is a known fact. There are certain kinds of alcohol that have a ton of health benefits. There's a reason we're drinking red wine, and that is it's loaded with resveratrol, which is super good for you. It also has restorative and kind of calming properties. But you should probably drink less, is the short. There's a question that came up.
Let's talk about this one here.
Which one?
Both of you talk about visualizing the word in an image, but it always is hard for me to search an image to represent a word. So to rephrase that question, when you're memorizing a phrase or a word, you want to come up with some kind of imagery in order to encode the word and place it somewhere in your memory, like in a memory palace. And then when you come back, you decode it. So it's a question I get a lot is, how do you create these images? And a lot of people struggle with that. Do you have something for that?
Well, let me reread the question. We talk about visualizing the word in an image, but it's always hard. I also want to read the questions because there are people who will tune in just to the audio. But we talk about creating the word in an image, but it's always hard to search for an image to represent a word. How can I improve that? So we give a lot of creativity exercises because ultimately coming up with a word to match a given concept or image is a matter of creativity. And so we give the how many uses exercise. If you can practice your creativity, how many uses are there for this wine glass? Well, it could be a wine glass. It could be an ashtray. It could be a piece of artwork. you'll find that you're kind of exercising the creativity muscle, and then you'll be able to come up with images faster. Someone asked, which I really liked, hi Anthony, how could you combine speed reading with the magnetic memory method?
Well, let me get back to that first thing. The reason why I want to jump in on that first thing is because in addition to what Jonathan said, which is very good, the imagine the multiple things that you can do with this, a memory exercise that you can do right now, today, is look out your window and see a person and try to put into your memory 4 things about that person. So the color of their pants, the color of their shoes, whether they're wearing glasses or not, what kind of bags they're carrying, and just start doing that as a regular activity in your life. That's going to make it easier for you to select images because you're selecting images from the environment around you as a regular practice.
Right.
The other thing that you can do is actually create a pool of images in advance. So if you make an Excel file or just a grid on some paper and you put down actors, politicians, cartoon characters, and so forth, and you fill those in, then you're going to give yourself a better idea of the kinds of figures that you're familiar with. And then, if you want to really get good, because it's not just about coming up with images of actors and stuff, you want to create actions. So here's your grid. You got actors, you got politicians, let's say. Then you have another column that says action and then reaction. So let's say you've got Obama, Brad Pitt. Then in the action section, you have Obama kicks Brad Pitt in the nose.
Oh, yeah.
Then the reaction is Brad Pitt hits Obama over the face with a toaster oven. And you just go through that and you create as many combinations as you can. And so then when the time comes to memorize a word, you're just boom, 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 because you've done these creativity drills of seeing images in action. So Anthony Metivier is my hero from Truthling898. Woo!
You're our hero.
Thank you. Now,
yeah.
Anything to add to that?
Yes. So there's an important point there, which is that animated images and images with action, that the image of Obama getting kicked or kicking, these things are more interesting to the brain. There's a reason. You talk about moonwalking with Einstein. It's a great book that we've both read by Joshua Foer. There's a reason that that's so memorable because it's poignant and it's ridiculous. And the brain remembers things that are ridiculous or poignant. So these humdrum, like the brown fox jumps over the dog, well, that's not really particularly memorable or unique. So these markers should be strange and bizarre. Someone asked, well, I want to come back to how do you apply the magnetic memory method to speed reading. But first, 2 people have asked about nootropics and brain stimulants. I've been experimenting for years, and I've been experimenting all weekend on Anthony. And so brain stimulants are a wide topic that I'm very passionate about. And I think the first thing is to discover that there's so much more out there than caffeine. Caffeine is, I call it a poor man's stimulant because all it does is reduce fatigue. Okay, it blocks the receptors that tells your brain, I'm tired. There are so many other stimulants that do so many other things. Even in the class of chemicals that caffeine is in, which is called a xanthine, there's theobromine and theophylline. Caffeine, theobromine, theophylline are all in something called yerba mate, which I drink pretty religiously. We've been drinking it. I have photos of Anthony hunched over the computer like this, just like humming away. There are different classes of chemicals that will relax your heart rate, give you more focus, improve blood flow, all these things. Then you have things like racetams, piracetam, aniracetam. Those are completely side effect free, proven things to improve the brain's function. And then, of course, you have all the ADD medications, your Adderall, stuff like that. Stay away unless you actually need this stuff and you actually have ADD. Some people actually have ADD, and that's your deal. And then you have all the herbal stuff, which is really great. Ginkgo biloba, ginseng, really good for the brain. Citrus fruit, great for the brain. Vitamin B6, B12, perfect stimulants, wonderful stimulants. So experiment, but experiment safely. Try these things. Piracetam you can try safely, modafinil less so. And realize that there's a ton of different chemicals. Personally, if you look in my bedroom drawer right now, I have 10 different substances, almost all of them natural, some of them not, that I choose based on what I need. So if I need creativity, I'm going to go with piracetam. If I need just focus, energy, and tenacity to slog through something, I'm going to go with something like forskolin or artichoke heart extract, things like that.
Forskolin.
Forskolin. It's not foreskin. It's forskolin.
When he says experiment with these things, what he means is consult with your doctor before
consult
you
with your doctor.
with things.
But I mean, if someone's going to take a healthy dose of B6, B12, I will take that liability to say it's okay to take a daily dose of B12.
He'll take that liability.
I will take that liability. Check with your doctor in any case. But
you should be actually going to your doctor anyway. I went to my doctor before I went here. I was totally freaked out because he said it's time for you to get all these shots and stuff. And I said, okay, I'll take my shots, tendinitis or whatever they give you. Mm-hmm. And I said, is it going to affect my memory?
Tendinitis? Tetanus.
Tetanus. He said, is it going to affect my memory in any way? And he said, your memory, man, is magnetic. And it's true because my doctor, I send him copies of all my books to make sure that he knows that I'm not just any patient. I'm his magnetic patient. And it's true. In Germany, he always says Professor Dr. Metivier.
It's very German of him.
Which is very nice. And of course, I look like the dude. And everybody else wonders why does he get such a preferential treatment. Anyway, the thing with, my opinion is I've been enjoying all the experiments Jonathan's been making with me on the chemicals, and I certainly have felt some effects. But if you're a person who's just going throughout everyday life and you aren't interested in that, or it's just not something you're going to do, or you don't have access to all these resources and so forth, the one thing that you always have recourse to, no matter what you're eating or any of that, are the technology, the actual architectural techniques of creating a memory palace, for example. The fattest, most Twizzler eating, Cheeto suffocated human being on earth who does nothing other than watch The Simpsons can still use memory techniques. And so that's the ground basis of mental performance. Now, all of those other health things that you're going to do, you do one push-up, you're going to have more advantage over someone who doesn't, but those techniques are there for you. So the primary thing that I would say is don't ask supplements or diet or exercise to be the thing that improves your memory. Use the memory techniques to improve your memory, and use all those other things to give your mind that extra supercharged basis to operate those memory techniques. You know what I'm saying? So it's a chicken and the egg thing, except for the fact is that here we know what comes first, and that's the memory techniques at the end of the day. But you need the body in order to have the memory techniques. So you know what I'm getting at. Yeah,
we're falling super behind on questions. Okay. I just want to throw in, don't be the Cheeto eating, Twizzler guzzling. No. Do your exercise, because honestly, you take all these drugs that we just talked about, and I'll post a list for you guys. I'll be happy to post it. Someone asked if I can post it in Facebook, whatever.
Yeah.
You take all those and you compare them to the natural adrenaline and serotonin that your brain produces when you exercise and when you have a healthy diet, and there's no comparison. You want to have a healthy brain? Get on the exercise bike. Get out there, lift heavy stuff, run, be healthy, do all that stuff. Let's dig back a little bit, and I think we probably have to get a little bit more shorter form, or we're just going to get buried here.
Someone was asking about virtual memory palaces.
Virtual memory palaces. Let's dig into that. So they asked, you talk about virtual memory palaces, which I'm not familiar with, and they wanted to know my opinion. So maybe you explain what that is, and I'll tell you what I think.
Okay, well, virtual memory palace is something that is not based on real location. So to give a simple example of a virtual memory palace, it would be, I'm in Jonathan's apartment. I use it as a memory palace. It's not virtual because I've been here. It's not invented. I've seen it with my very own eyes.
Sure.
However, if I imagine that I'm in the next building and I create this memory palace based on a place I've never been, or a video game, or Homer Simpson's house, or Walter White's house on Breaking Bad, that's a virtual memory palace because I have no tangential connection to it. I've never been there. So in my opinion, the elementary school that I went to is a stronger memory palace because I've been there than anything that I would see on TV or anything that I would imagine being like the hotel across the street. This is just, to me, absolutely clear because of that relationship to being there. That said, some people have some success with that, but now that you know what it is.
So actually, Dr. Lev does this as well, because at the speed that he reads like 2,000 words a minute, which I do not. But at the speed that he reads, and essentially he runs, I don't want to say he doesn't get out much, but he has 3 kids. He's not walking around cities like you are. Like, you walked around London last week and you probably created how many new memory palaces?
Yeah.
And he's not doing that. And so he developed this method where he has like a memory landscape. And so he does this. For me, I don't rely that heavily on the memory palace technique because really what I teach is accelerated learning and accelerated reading. And it's not so much about memorizing facts. When I do use a memory palace, I have 3 or 4. They're my childhood home, my elementary school, my middle school, and my townhouse in the US. So I always use a physical location, but that's probably because I've not maximized all the locations that I could. So.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I just want to pick up on, Jonathan mentioned that I was walking around London last week. A lot of people ask me about how I'm so productive and so forth. And the reality is that I'm walking around all the time. I do something that I call in my mind road work. And that is that I get up, I take my little iPhone, and I have an app in here, and I write just about everything that I write in this app while I'm walking from cafe to cafe to cafe throughout London.
Do you dictate or do you write?
No, I write on this little app. It's called Plain Text app.
That shocks me.
And I won't show it now, but I'll show him later. I have written at least
books, like 20
entire
books.
Probably 20 books, yeah. I've written, and I just break them into chapters. And I do this road work. So one of the reasons why I have so many damn memory palaces is because I do road work. I'm always constantly moving from cafe to cafe to cafe, and I don't want to gross you out.
Sure.
My rule of thumb is that I work until I have to pee, and then I go to the next cafe, and I walk, and then I listen to an audiobook, or I type while I'm walking. And this is a great actual way to be more creativity, is to work while you're walking.
There's something about the movement. I mean, Steve Jobs always did it. He had walking meetings, and Tim Ferriss is a big advocate. You want to go through your Anki deck, Anki being a software for memorization. Do your Anki deck while you're on the exercise bike.
Yeah.
We got actually a lot of really good questions.
Okay, bring them on.
Someone wants to thank Anthony for his honesty and transparency and sharing his very personal experiences. Indeed, you are the best. Cheers.
And there's a reason why I do that, and that's because it's so important to just cut the BS out of a lot of stuff. I mean, I study just about everybody in my area of interest and other areas of interest, and it does nothing for nobody to put on a show. You just got to be yourself. It helps more people. And,
Agreed.
Whatever.
How soon after being somewhere does it qualify as a good material for a memory palace, or is it just based on how familiar we think we are?
I tell you something, if you get it in your head that you are going to study a place to be a memory palace, we're looking at a minute or less.
Wow.
Just don't go into a restaurant without having in your mind that it's going to be a memory palace. And what I do is I have a little notebook.
Old school.
Old school, my friend. But when I go into a new restaurant, cafe, bookstore, whatever, I often just take a little sketch that connects my brain with my hand with this, and it becomes a memory palace. And then I go in and I'll be memorizing some phrases from a language that I'm studying, and I'll test myself, actually. I'll have a book of phrases from a book and then memorize them, put the book in my backpack so I can't look at it, test them using that memory palace, but I draw it out so that it's visualized. So basically, let's put it this way. Within 5 minutes, I've created that memory palace. 10 minutes later, I'm already using it and it's already working.
Well, and I want to say this. For the purpose of the memory palace, and correct me if I'm wrong, it doesn't actually matter at all if my memory of my middle school is actually correct, as long as it's consistent every time I call it up. It doesn't matter at all, because it's just about having a consistent set of loci. And if in fact that classroom was 103 and classroom 105 was, it doesn't matter. The point is like having this physical location.
Yeah, it's actually the consistency that matters.
Exactly.
And that's why writing it out and creating an Excel file that also sees it in a linear top-down order helps you calcify it, can I say? Cement it into your mind so that you're always using it the same way.
Right.
As we were talking about earlier, it's not a movie that you're playing in your head. It's a stage play. So your memory palace is like a stage. The images that you create are actors. And as you move from station to station, the way that they move is producing or decoding the information in the way that they act. But you are the director who's staging their behaviors to get them to produce the dialogue, which is the information that you're looking for.
Yeah. I want to take this question. Is it even possible to make a memory palace with speed reading? I'm going to let you attack it, but then I think I know what I would say. We covered it a little bit in our course.
Okay. Well, I want to be, someone just said how they're grateful that I'm transparent and all of that. I'm going to be totally transparent with you. I don't do speed reading. I actually have talked extensively in my courses about slow reading, and it's not my thing. So,
well, and you have a PhD in like poetry and language. And that's your scene, is enjoying the language and the prose.
I mean, I feel like I'm getting old. And let me tell you this, I've done my research in speed reading, I know about the validity about it, and
Thank you.
No, I do. I've actually read about 40 dissertations in speed reading and accelerated learning and all these techniques. I like dissertations. I highly recommend that you go to your local library and ask for access to things like ERIC and different services that will look at dissertations. But I'm actually working on a podcast about speed reading. I'm going to do some experiments with it, but I actually don't do it myself.
Call me, maybe?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. But you also don't want to just do your friend's research. I mean,
obviously,
you want to do independent stuff. But that's the point aside, is I talk a lot about slow reading, and I talk about how to memorize a textbook realistically. And that involves actually reading the damn thing for particular purposes. So, for example, just very quickly, what I would do is I'd look at a book, and there is a speed reading element here. I look at a book, I see there's 10 chapters. I decide in my mind I'm going to take 3 points from each chapter. I make a memory palace that encompasses that possibility, and then I read the book and I look for the things that pop out.
Oh, so you make the memory palace and then you fill it as you read?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
And typically what I'll do is actually have index
That's
cards.
interesting.
So let's say I'm going to take 3 points from a 10-chapter book. I get 30 index cards out, right? If I don't want to build a memory palace in advance, I get 30 index cards out, jot down what that is, page numbers, whatever you're going to need. Because when I was a university student, you needed to have citations, you needed to have page numbers, you needed to have the name of the book and all that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. Why waste memory space on what you can write down? I always say that. So 30 pieces of information. I'm reading for what pops, what I think is going to be valuable. And I either memorize it in the memory palace I built before, or I have it on the index card, and then I memorize it later from the index card, matching it to the memory palace. Okay. And so that's actually a very, very rapid way to get a book down the hatch and get the most essential elements. And I call this the rhizomatic method, because what ends up happening is that, let's say you got 30 pieces of information that you've memorized from a book, your mind has the natural ability to fill in the details. Mm-hmm. So as long as you've got pillars, you're going to find, and it's not going to be perfect, it's not going to be video recorded, but you're going to find this weird effect happening where it just, this is why I call it the magnetic memory method, is because it just seems to magnetically attract the stuff that you apparently didn't pay attention to. Not everything, but enough. And so someone the other day was asking me about this, and I said, you know what? If you really want to, I will tell you everything I memorized about Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics if you want. And I got started, and he said, okay, I believe you.
I get it.
And this was back between 2006 and 2009. So it's still there. And I'm still like, oh, and that connects to Augustine and blah, blah, blah. Because it's just, so I like to read slow. Sorry.
Yeah. So I would say in my course, I kind of teach that speed reading and memory palaces are kind of two different worlds. And that's because speed reading is about getting an understanding of the reading as quickly as possible. If you then determine that you want to remember things, look, the memory palace method is good for remembering something with 100% accuracy. You want to take 52 cards, you want to know the exact order they're in, forwards and backwards, you use a memory palace. You want to memorize 6 different credit cards, yours and your wife's, with 100% accuracy, obviously, you use a memory palace. You want to know exactly the words in the Russian language and exactly how they're pronounced, you use the memory palace. You want to remember concepts, vague concepts. A book I often recommend is Peter Thiel's 0 to 1. I only need to remember the vague concepts. So I don't put them into a memory palace. Honestly, I think the point you made, why waste memory space on something you can write down? I go into Evernote, I jot down the 5 top points that I learned from that book. Now, a lot of our students are doing reading. For example, someone just asked a question about medical students. It could be that you're doing reading that you need to remember with 100% accuracy. And we get that, and we teach that in our course. The point is, at least for me, and I know some of these memory champions, they're using the memory palace method to memorize a deck of cards in 26 seconds. But that's the same memory palace, and they're so exercised and so practiced. The normal mere humans can get to that level, sure, but you're going to spend years getting your memory palace technique up to that speed.
No, I don't know about that, but
you're going to spend a lot of time.
I didn't even know about that. I mean, that's not the point, though. The point about how fast or how slowly you can come to proficiency to memorize a deck of cards in 26 seconds is not the point. The point is that people have a pain in getting the information that they want into their memory.
Exactly.
And if it comes down to medical terminology and speed reading, I don't really know. I'm not a medical student. I've never studied that sort of thing. I come from a different world. But I think what we're trying to say together is that memory champions are not the people to follow for the mass consumption of information. They're memorizing to forget 20 seconds after they've won the competition or lost it.
Sure.
So those techniques are built and designed for speed memorization and speed forgetting, or at least say speed decay of whatever's memorized. Now, I don't know to the extent to which you can speed read a medical textbook or a legal textbook, or even the stuff that I did. Maybe you could speed read Aristotle and still extract the same sort of things. I think it's worth your time to explore both and figure out what it is that's going to work for you. But at the end of the day, I go with Jonathan 100%. If you want to have absolute total recall of anything, whatever you have speed read, memorize slow.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say is actually we advocate at the end of each paragraph, review your markers, your visual markers, because it ultimately comes down to spaced repetition, right? There's no way around the fact that if you don't repeat something in your memory, it's not staying, right? These memory palaces that you remember from 10 years ago, you repeated them over and over because they were part of your PhD, okay? So there's no two ways around that. There's no method that I've ever seen under the sun to read something once and remember it forever. But with that said, you have to be judicious and you have to say, look, this book that I happen to be reading right now is going to be so critical that I'm going to put in the effort to do the review at the end of the chapter. That's a given. At the end of the chapter, review. What are the points you made? Then when you finish reading the book, you go back, you play back your markers. Most likely your brain, your hippocampus will already have determined what the most important things in that book were. It's going to boil down to 5 to 10 points. You decide if you want to put that in a memory palace for storing it forever. You can have a memory palace entitled Business Books. It can be your first office, and then you can store visual memories for every single one of those points. Me personally, I don't do that. I take a note in Evernote. I highlight things when I read, I'm not ashamed to admit, and I put the exact quotes that I found interesting because I'd rather personally read it directly. Now, do I have informal markers around different concepts like the Pareto principle? Totally. But that's because it's become a natural process for me to create these visual markers. I don't store them in a memory palace, personally speaking. I use memory palaces, like I said, I reserve it for things that I need 100% accuracy on.
You know, we were talking earlier today about memorizing cards and do you need a memory palace or do you not? And I gave a reason why that I use memory palaces, and it has to do, as I've talked about in everything that I talk about with having to do with card memorization, is it's a mental exercise. I think it's one of the most powerful mental exercises there is. We were asked earlier about creating images and so forth. Well, if you want to get good at creating images really fast, in addition to the exercise I gave you, learn to memorize cards and use a memory palace to position those images along the way. Because cards they're not exactly abstract, but they're not exactly concrete either. But the thing of it is that they're also, to memorize a deck of cards for me and why it needs a memory palace, different than some other people, is because I'm going to do certain card tricks with it. So,
Sure. All right, guys, let me just hit pause really quickly to let you all know about this episode's sponsor. As you guys already know, I'm a big fan of Neotropics. I've tried probably 50 or so different pills and potions for increased concentration, but only recently have I discovered a nootropic gum. It's called Neurogum, and unlike the boring old caffeinated gum I used to chew in the 90s, this stuff has L-theanine. Now, you may remember L-theanine from our episode with Dr. Andrew Hill, who discussed its nootropic and calming effects at length. When you consider that chewing gum has also been proven to increase focus, boost metabolism, reduce dental plaque and cavities, and possibly even make you more physically attractive to potential mates, it's definitely worth working Neurogum into your normal nootropic routines. I've been chewing on it and I love its fast effects and calming energy. So I really recommend you guys order yours today at neurogum.com. That's neurogum.com and get an early adopter discount.
So Lucas has a lot of questions coming up with mental images. What can I do? Thank you. You are awesome. We talked about this a little bit, but just to rehearse, when you want to come up with mental images, you got to practice the actual art of coming up with images, and it's super easy to do. Just get out a piece of paper and start listing all of the celebrities that you can think of, all the politicians, all the musicians, all the actors, and start seeing images of them in your mind. And when we talk about seeing images, you don't have to have high-definition television in front of your eyes. You need to just have whatever it is that comes to your mind and focus on it, think about it. And think about how that you see it, what seeing means to you. Because when I see things in my mind, it's often just a ghostly kind of image. It's almost just the outline of something. It's not this clear again, a high definition television image. It's something else. And then you amplify it. You totally make it large and bright and colorful based on whatever it is. And then another thing that you can do to become better at creating images is to go inside a memory palace in your mind and take an object, like for instance, a glass of wine, and see that glass of wine in a room in your memory palace, and just imagine floating it up, floating it down, floating it this way, floating it that way, this way, that way, and take an object, take a list of those politicians and see them in your memory palaces. Don't just do these mental exercises in random. See them in your memory palaces wherever you happen to be, wherever you're going, and do it on the bus. And like I said before, see people on the street, observe them, try and memorize 4 or 5 different features about them, and then later write them down. So we got another here. This is interesting.
Someone asked, by the way, about foods, that the curse of having a memory is you remember everything. Someone asked that we didn't acknowledge. What are the foods that improve memory? Fish. Fish is high in omega-3 fatty acids.
That's why we've ordered some.
Exactly. Our diet, our Western diet, is high in omega-6. You want to counter the omega-3, omega-6 fatty acid ratio.
This is cool. We got a magician here, and he's a brother.
Go after it.
I'm a street performer, and in my show, I use multiple audience members. Even though I repeat their names while I'm using them, by the end of the show, I cannot remember their names to thank them publicly. Any ideas how to improve this? Absolutely. Okay, here's just the basic stuff. When you ask someone's name, pay attention to what they're saying.
Bingo.
Say it back in your mind, and then say it to them. So if someone says, hey, my name is Ravit, then you say Ravit in your mind, and you say, Ravit, it's very, very nice to meet you. And then I would get a picture of like ramen noodles or something.
Really?
Well, I don't know, right? Like
I get a ravine.
A ravine. Well, okay, I don't know.
I picture a ravine as like a river.
Oh, river. Yeah.
So ravine is drowning in the ravine. Ravit is drowning in the ravine.
Yeah, whatever. I mean, you come up with stuff. But here's the thing about memorizing faces, and I think or names. Sorry, this is the thing that ruins it for a lot of people. They read the common techniques and they say, "Oh, that doesn't work for me." And it's because they're told to see that image on the person's face. Let me ask you, what could be more disrespectful than seeing an image on someone's face that you want to memorize their name? Put it on their shoulder, or put it behind their back where you met them, or anything but their face, so that when you're looking at them, you're looking at them as a human being. Sure. And also, the time to practice memorizing names is not during a street performance when you're a magician. The time to practice names is when you're in private. And get a list of names and practice them. And then in a low-stress environment, recall the list of names to your dog and record the audio or write it out on paper without being able to cheat, and then go check your list. Then you increase the anxiety. You go and you say, look, I've memorized this list of names I found on Wikipedia, random search or whatever, to your family. And you say, I'm kind of nervous about this. It's totally new to me, but just bear with me. I want to see if I get this correct in front of people. And then you take it to the next level. The next thing you know, you go to the next live performance. You get somebody up. They say their name is Gengador Dianand or whatever. And you just, that's actually someone.
The question, is where did you come up with Gengador Dianand?
Well, I met this guy named Gengador Dianand, and I needed to remember his name. And so that's why I came up with him as an example. And he was a pretty rad dude.
Anthony, our attempt to order a carb-free dinner has failed because there are rice noodles in our salad.
They put rice noodles in it?
Rice noodles in our salad. Unforgivable.
And yet you are eating them anyway.
Yeah, my judgment is lapsed. How long, if possible, would it take to be able to read around 500 words per minute and be able to place something in a memory palace every 5 seconds? Well, first question, why would you want to place something in a memory palace every 5 seconds? We just ranted on and on and on about how you reserve the memory palace method or magnetic memory method.
Check out the podcast replay.
Check out the replay, but we just talked about how you reserve it for things that you need 100% recall on. If you're reading stuff, probably you don't need 100% recall. In terms of 500 words per minute, it's going to depend on how much you practice, and also where you're coming from. Bon appetit, by the way.
Bon appetit, bon appetitia. The thing, too, about this is that people set these completely... It's a very respectable goal, but it's also has a bizarre element to it because it's not actually that useful, you know? You don't want to have this mind buzzing around like a bumblebee. That would be autism. You want to have the ability to capture what you need so that you can use it when you need it. And that's quite different than 500 words a minute with memorizing something every 5 seconds. You want something that's actually useful. And is that useful? I don't know. I mean, to what application can you actually apply those metrics, basically?
It's essentially, I think what we're coming to, if I can kind of summarize, is that knowing when to use which skill is as important as knowing the skills. Knowing when to just use visual markers or use a memory palace. You need to judiciously choose which technique you're going to use at which point and how much you want to invest. And I often think, like, basically, to what level of clarity and reproducibility do I need this content? And if I'm reading some business book, I really don't need 100% retention. I need to be able to outline the key concepts. So I'll make a marker for each one, but if that's 4 or 5 concepts, they don't need to go into a memory palace. You know what I mean?
I'm never going to forget the first time I ate sushi and drank wine on the internet at the same time. Someone asked about spaced repetition, and
Yeah.
I think that what I want to say about that is that, as Jonathan mentioned earlier, there's always some form of repetition involved. I mean, the great philosopher Gilles Deleuze had a book called Repetition and Difference. And so here's the thing for me that's very, very important about the difference between using an SRS-based repetition software and using your mind to repeat things with a memory palace or some other memory technique, is that, as Gilles Deleuze said, repetition is difference. But it's not difference if you're using a spaced repetition software. It's just hammering the same thing at you again and again and again with the wish and the hope and the prayer that it's eventually going to sink in. Why do this when you have an amazing creative imagination that you can use in order to get things in there faster, knowing that repetition is difference? And that's that, again, that metaphor of the memory palace as a stage, the imagery as actors, you as the director that produces that, knowing that it's always different. And the more different it is, the more you're going to remember it as you go through that again and again and again. So if you're going to use spaced repetition software, let's say you're learning Russian, the last thing on earth that you should do is have the Russian word on one side and the English definition on the other. What you should have, if you're going to do this, I think, you can give your thoughts in a second here, but you should have the Russian word, and then you should have the crazy imagery in English that you use to memorize it on the other side, so that you're giving your mind no other choice than to visit that stage in your mind, see the actors, and get them to perform the sound and the meaning of that word. So that's my hardcore, almost
100%.
pedantic and dogmatic take.
100%. You want to link into emotional, meaningful concepts, ideas, and visual imagery. So my word, I've talked about this on podcasts before, but it's just a really nice example. The Russian word for open is odkriti. It even sounds nice, right?
Oh yeah.
And
Nicer than Spanish.
I don't link that to the word open. I link it to an image of me with a stab wound standing in front of an emergency room, and gushing blood. And I say, the emergency room ought to be open because it's critical. Odkriti, right? There's nowhere in that is it linked to the word open. It's linked to the concept open. And I mean, that is in a memory palace in my office in my house in California. And it's sitting on the desk by the window. Odkriti. I have a specific group of loci for O.
Here's 2 questions that come in at the same time that actually go together in a way. So El Conte asks, I would like to know how to effectively memorize mind maps. Is it possible to combine mnemotechnics and mind maps? And then Philip Clearin asks, how do you get into a flow state? Well, here's my thing about this. Is that mind maps are a flow state. You're sitting there, you got your center point, and you got this squiggly line here, and you got this word here, and da-da-da-da-da. You're doing all this stuff. Maybe you're getting some colors. Maybe you're drawing a cat. Maybe you're drawing a fish. Maybe you're doing whatever. You're in the flow state. That's what a mind map is a flow state. At the end, you've got this crazy thing that looks like you've been on LSD, right? And
maybe you have. We don't know. We don't judge.
No, but yeah. I mean, whatever. We won't get into it. But the whole thing is that I think that mind maps are a great way of getting into a flow state. But when it comes to combining memory palaces and mind maps, I think that if you want to do this, what you need to do is extract from that flow state, from that mind map, a linear order in order to place it in a memory palace, one that produces knowledge through the rhizomatic techniques that we talked about before.
Sure.
So that's a great way, I think, of combining those 2 questions.
Well, and it's also a great way of coming back to this idea of determining what method suits the the level of comprehension you want for each piece of information you want to learn. Right.
Here's a really important question.
Both for Jonathan and Anthony combined, let's say you want to master a textbook for tomorrow's exam. Well, first off, don't procrastinate.
Yeah.
Now, with speed reading techniques and memory palaces, what's the most efficient way? I have a feeling he's sitting there and he has an exam tomorrow.
Yeah, that's what it seems like.
I think Visebt has an exam tomorrow that we need to help him prepare for.
And here's what I want to tell you, and I think it's probably going to be the same answer for you.
Potentially.
Is I say this a lot, and I'm going to say it again for the same reason that I say it a lot. Dig your wells before you're thirsty. Mm-hmm. That's my answer. I mean,
don't get into this situation, but given that you are in this situation, first things first, I would be looking at Pareto principle. What is the 20% of information that's going to give me an 80% understanding? I don't know what the exam is in, but what is the 20% of information that's going to give me an ability to communicate that I have 80% of the knowledge that's being tested here, right? I would first and foremost figure that out, okay? The second thing I would do is I would break that down into 5 to 10 points that would go in loci in the most familiar memory palace I possibly have, something like my shower, something that I see every single day. It's temporal. I don't need it in the long term.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
And I would break those points down. I would invest so much energy into making the visual symbols complex. So probably we're talking about a mathematical exam. Each formula would get into, a very complex, detailed visual image that I would play over and over and over for a few minutes. And it would go into one rack on my shower shelf. And from there, at least I know, again, dig your wells before you're thirsty.
Yeah.
But at least I would know that those key points that are going to comprise 80% of the comprehension and understanding, I have those down. So I can at least communicate to whoever's grading my exam, and also this is a matter of getting into their psychology. Yeah, can say, okay, they tried.
Well, hey, and speaking about that, a lot depends on your subject. But when you talk about getting into the psychology of the person doing the grading and so forth, here's a little quick story, and it's totally subject specific. But when I was in the 4th year of my university BA, I had a course on romantic poetry. I was really ill that year. It was one of the first years where I had to take lithium, and I was like this all the time. And what ended up happening is I studied some of the wrong stuff. So there was a question at the end. It was an essay question, and I had to answer about Byron's cane. And I never got around to reading Byron's cane. To this day, I never have gotten around to reading Byron's cane. Whoops. And it was a huge, huge question. It was 30 points or something like this. And to not be able to answer it meant certain failure. So what I did is I said, honestly, I didn't get around to reading this, but I can tell you a whole lot about Wordsworth and Coleridge and their biblical references. Now, Cain is a biblical reference, right? And so I just went on and on and on and on and on. It was kind of like, isn't it interesting how this connects with what Byron must have been talking about in Cain? And I said, it was no BS, but I just kind of went around the subject. Anyway, I wound up with an A in the course, okay? And so the whole thing is never leave a question blank under any circumstances whatsoever, because nothing is automatically 0. Something has the potential to be more than 0. So I'm not saying BS, just show your knowledge from a different direction.
Yeah. I want to quickly answer in plain English. Can you define mind maps as compared to memory palaces? I'm going to really quickly answer this because I really want to deal with this one after. Yeah. Mind maps, visual, nodal, neural network looking structure. It looks like a web where you draw out actual physical notes in the real world, outlining all the points and the branches they break into. We're happy with that. Memory palace, imaginary structure or real structure, which you've called into memory, which has nodes of memory and visual images stored along the way. Cool with that?
I just say that a memory palace is a mental construct based on a real place.
Bingo.
And that you've strategically subdivided into stations, as I call them, in order to map out information along a journey that you can revisit.
Bingo.
At will.
So this one, which I really like, Jamie says, how do you integrate all of this into your life quickly and effectively? Well, you don't, number one.
Well, no, you do. You do.
And also more specifically, especially incorporating the 20-80 principle and giving up perfectionism.
Okay, well, this is beautiful.
Right.
Because memory palaces and perfectionism do not go together. Memory techniques and super learning and speed reading and perfectionism do not go together. I mean, I'm speaking on territory that I actually don't do when I say speed reading.
You're there.
But here's the thing. Give up perfectionism, period. You can't even be perfect at perfectionism. That's the thing that perfectionists don't realize. You can't even be perfect at that. And in terms of being quick and effective, look, you take our courses, you can do them in a day if you want to. And you take notes, you ask us questions, whatever it takes. But nothing's going to happen unless you start taking action. We were just shooting a video course today, or we're preparing to shoot a video course today. And one of the things that I quoted in preparation is John Cage, begin anywhere, dive in. A lot of people,
so true.
A lot of people ask me all the time, well, what if I make a mistake, or how do I do this and how do I do that? They're asking for permission. You do not need permission to breathe. You just suck it in and then you push it out. And it's the same thing with anything in the world. You want to accomplish something, you figure out what it is, you put in the time. If it costs a bit of money, then you pay it. I mean, I just paid $4,000 to sit in a room with a guy for 2 hours, not 2,000 hours. That would have been a good deal. But
that would have been a bargain.
It would have been a bargain. But I spent a lot of money to sit with a guy who knows a hell of a lot more than I did. And I paid him a lot of money for it because I want to be able to do stuff. But at the end of the day, what he told me is really hard. It's going to take a lot of effort. And all I have to do is begin anywhere. Breathe in, push it out, and it's going to happen. And that's exactly that. So if you read our books, you take our courses, just start somewhere.
Yeah, I agree. I always say, and by the way, the gentleman or lady talking about multiplication help for children, it is now in huge letters on my screen. We're going to get to it. Okay. So don't tune out. I always say motion creates motion. Any motion will either give you negative feedback that you're doing something wrong and will then make you more efficient and effective in applying the next thing, or will give you positive reinforcement and encourage you and give you that nice little dopamine release that says, keep doing what you're doing. This is working.
Yeah.
Fortunately, and to your credit, with memory palaces, you jump in, you say, like, I'm going to remember my girlfriend's birthday using a memory palace. Almost 100% guarantee if you do it right, it's going to work. And immediately, I mean, the first time you explained to me how to memorize a word in a different language in a memory palace, for those of you who don't know, I used to kind of say, these are memory palaces, try them out, they don't work for me. Then Anthony came along and he's like, actually, they work for everybody, almost always. Anyway, the first time I experienced that and I was speaking to someone in Russian and I threw out this word that I'd struggled with, it's like magic. And that reinforcement, the success principle here, that reinforcement, it will accelerate your progress.
Yeah.
But how do I implement this into my daily life? I use pragmatism. Do I use a memory palace to remember everything? Absolutely not. However, when someone tells me you need to take bus number 172, do I say, like, I have a pen that's falling off a cliff as it's drawing a swan, something like that? Or do I use the major method? Yeah, bus number 172. It's going to save me from pulling out my phone 10 times.
Yeah. I'm always standing on the train tracks, like a national cross-international train or plane or whatever, and I see all these people. They're constantly pulling out their tickets. They're looking, they're worried, Just memorize it. You can use the waiting room in the airport or on the train tracks as your memory palace.
I do that all the time.
You just see that crazy bunny,
I have so many temporary memory palaces.
Yeah, I call it an impromptu memory palace.
Agreed. And also, when you meet people, generally, two people will not be standing in the exact same physical location. So as you're working your way around a conference or a cocktail party, literally where I meet the person becomes their loci.
Do you go to a lot of cocktail parties?
I try to. I'm single. If anybody out there, I'm single. I'm trying to meet people. Single, ready to mingle. All right, let's talk multiplication help. Before, I think we've actually polished off a bottle of wine, which should be somewhat explicatory as to the rambling nature.
It's all gone?
It's getting there.
I'm not rambling.
I am.
Okay, multiplication.
Multiplication help for the young people.
Yeah.
How would you teach someone multiplication tables if they were a youngin?
Okay, well, I like to use rhyme a lot for this. Mm-hmm. So 2 times 2 is 4 is a door. 3 times 3 is what? 9? 12. I don't know.
3 times 3 is 9.
No, 3 times, sorry.
Off to a bad start.
No, but 3 times 3 is 9. I'm feeling fine. And you just go through all of these things and you help the child see a rhyme. And you put that rhyme in a memory palace, right? So you're creating a rhyme with an image at the outcome. So at your door is 2 times 2 is 4 by the door. 3 times 3 is 9. I'm feeling fine.
Oh, that's good.
By the clock, which is time, really right? And you just make it around your house. And I remember coaching a person through this, and she had absolutely fantastic results with her daughter who was struggling with the multiplication times table. Now, it's up to you to figure out your own exact way you're going to do this. But if you can incorporate rhyme with image, with a space, then you can have your child walk through your house picking up each and every single equation and the outcome of the equation.
Actually, I'm going to tie together like 3 questions at once.
Do it.
We talked early on about creativity and how creativity is so important in these memory techniques and how you can train your creativity, because ultimately it comes down to using these techniques in creative ways. We also talked about lack of perfectionism and stuff like that, in that there's no perfect way to apply these techniques. Get creative, get messy, get sloppy, right? And so what I would do, because you can creatively apply these techniques, is I would tell my son or daughter, hopefully both, hopefully one of each, but I would say 3 times 3, that's 2 butts, parties. Right? Kids probably aren't going to mess around with the major method, but 3 times 3 is 2 butts, right? And if you accidentally back into somebody, imagine a symbol. You accidentally back into somebody and they're carrying a fish and they drop the fish. Well, 3, 3, 9. That's the visual symbol. So you now have a marker for that one equation. 3 times 3 equals 9. Let's try another one and see if my random idea works. 2 times 2 equals 4. 2 swans sitting together. They cross their necks and make a heart, and they're sitting on a chair. And you just have a symbol for every equation. How you feel about this, Maguro? You mind if I attack him?
Do it.
All right. Thank you, sir. So
you got to listen back to what we both said and experiment with both with your child and see what happens.
Exactly. The bottom line, though, that I do want to say, because we are saying, try this out, experiment with this, it can almost sound like not advice, but it is advice, because the advice is, A, do what works for you, but B, anything is better than repeating 2 times 2 equals 4, 2 times 2 equals 4. That's called rote memorization, and it doesn't work. And that's why all of academia, when you throw out the words memorization, they cringe. Because it doesn't work. It does not work to say 2 times 2 equals 4 100 times until you get it.
And when it does work,
right,
then people have a negative association to learning in general. And that's why they sit out drunk in their cars in the backyard collecting dust while cats mess around on the shed. Because they don't want to learn new stuff. They've been beaten over the head with all kinds of stuff.
And I want to say, I forgot what I want to say.
How telling.
The
thing is...
Alcohol. Someone asked alcohol and memory.
Yeah.
No bueno.
So will this be made available to people after the lecture? Well, we are recording it. It's going to be a podcast. And look, here's the thing.
If it's usable?
Yeah, no, we have to, because the thing is, we're talking about perfectionism and so on. We've both made mistakes. We both said things. I couldn't even...
We have traffic noise.
I couldn't even conjugate 9 plus 9 or whatever it was. 3 times 3.
Have no shame.
But it's not important. The whole thing is you get in there, you do that, you help people. And that's what I always tell people all the time, is when you've learned a skill, teach it to somebody else, because that's how you truly learn it.
That's why I taught the super learning course. I was like, I think I get this stuff, but just to make sure, let me spend 40 hours building a course on it.
Yeah, and it's more than just making sure. It's actually, you learn it for yourself at a much deeper level. And so if you actually want to claim that you've learned anything from either of us, you had better have taught it to somebody else first, and not just passed it on, but used it and then explained the source and how you used it, so that it multiplies and grows and essentially becomes, like I said before, rhizomatic.
Here we go with the remembering what I was going to say, which is this. I spend a lot of time, an inordinate amount of time, thinking about what our brains and our bodies were evolved to do. It's kind of like a weird thing for me. If anyone's curious about this, I read a book called Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. Incredible. History of the entire history of humankind. So I think a lot about, what does my digestive tract evolve to eat? What does my body evolve to do? I should be moving around. I shouldn't be sitting in chairs. I should be using the full, whatever. That's not the subject of this. But what does my brain evolve to do? My brain is evolved to remember where the food source is, to emotionally interpret if other people are a threat to me, to seek out mates to try and reproduce. I mean, get down to the basics of what we as animals are intended to do. And then you'll understand why these memory palaces work. And then you'll understand why visual memory works. And you'll understand that we think that we're these evolved creatures, but we still are subject to biological needs, and our brains work to serve those biological needs. So whenever I'm trying to learn something, I think, how can I make this relevant from an evolutionary perspective?
There's a quote here, Albert Einstein, if you can't teach it simply enough, you don't understand it enough.
So true.
I'd actually say that if it's understandable, it's not worth studying. Sorry. But
If it's understandable?
yeah, I mean, think about it. Like,
How do you figure? I mean, you understand memory palaces very thoroughly.
precisely the point. I'll never be done with them. So,
Okay, if it's masterable. But understandable is a different story.
Well, what I'm trying to say is that, to me, when I read that, I just kind of thought, wait a second. There's no infinite regress there. There's no labyrinths to be lost in. So
I agree. Yeah.
It's like music. I study music. I've been playing guitar for Jonathan all day. I don't know what he thought about it.
Fantastical.
But, I mean, I'm playing.
Man is a Renaissance man.
I'm playing guitar and music not because I want to get it to a point that's so simple that I can explain it to somebody. If you've ever taken a music lesson, you understand it will never be taught simply. And so,
That's true.
And it will never be interesting to study for the rest of your life if it could be simply expressed. So my point is we need to be careful with throwing out quotes from Albert Einstein and so on. Everybody has these quotes. I've even made some quotes today myself, and use quotes with caution. As Al Pacino says, if I can throw out a quote in The Devil's Advocate, he says, advice is the worst vice. So I'm kind of like throwing all these things together. I'm using a quote to tell you not to use quotes, which is advice, which is the worst vice, quoting Al Pacino. So, this is what I love. Infinite regress.
Cool parlor trick.
Did we got time for another question? Oh, it's another one about...
I mean, it's already 8, but I got all the time in the world. So.
Are you sure? I thought...
Well, man.
Okay, so...
Soonish.
Hey there, superhumans and all friends magnetic. This is Dr. Anthony Metivier here, and I hope you're enjoying this Q&A episode between Jonathan and I. This is it for part 1, but do not fear because we've released part 2 simultaneously. So make sure to queue it up next in your podcast app of choice. And hey, come on over to becomingasuperhuman.com and magneticmemorymethod.com. We got lots of cool stuff for you. Subscribe to us, and we'll send you some cool stuff, and you'll be notified of more cool stuff in the future. And of course, show your love by pressing all those share buttons and spreading it around all over the place, wherever you happen to go. Okay, so we'll see you in part 2 of this very, very special and exclusive Q&A with the great Jonathan Levi and I, your magnetic friend, Anthony Metivier.
Thanks for tuning in to the Becoming Superhuman podcast. For more great skills and strategies, or for links to any of the resources mentioned in this episode, visit www.becomingasuperhuman.com/podcast. We'll see you next time.